In the moments following Fanny's crash on the staircase, the boys behave with surprising presence of mind as they fetch the wrestling coach, who lives nearby, to give Fanny first aid. They also send someone to Dr. Stankpole's house. Dr. Stankpole arrives and has Fanny carried out on a chair. Dr. Stankpole tells Jean that Fanny's leg is broken again but assures him that it is a much cleaner break than last time. The crowd of boys breaks up and Jean sneaks off to the infirmary to peek in and try to see what is going on. He sits outside in the dark, imagining Fanny saying absurd things to the doctors and nurses, until finally the doctor and the other adults leave, turning out the light in Fanny's room. Jean crawls up to the side of the building and opens the window. Fanny recognizes him in the darkness and begins to struggle angrily in his bed, accusing Jean of coming to break something else in him. He falls out of bed, but Jean restrains himself from going into the room to help him back up. Jean tells Fanny that he is sorry and then leaves. All through the night, Jean wanders the campus, thinking that he can see a new level of meaning in everything around him and feeling that he himself is nothing but a meaningless dream, a roaming ghost. He falls asleep under the stadium, imagining that its walls can speak, that they can say powerful things, but that he, as a ghost, cannot hear them. The next morning, he returns to his room before class and finds a note from Dr. Stankpole asking him to bring some of Fanny's things to the infirmary. Jean packs Fanny's suitcase and brings it to him. Fanny's voice betrays no emotion, but as he looks through the suitcase, Jean sees that his hands are shaking. Fanny tells Jean that all winter he has been writing to various military branches all over the Allied world, begging to be allowed to enlist, but that all of them have rejected him because of his leg. He says that the reason he kept telling Jean that there was no war was that he could not be a part of it. Jean tells Fanny that he would never have been any good in the war anyway because he would have gone over to the other side and made friends and gotten everyone confused about whom they were fighting. Fanny bursts into tears and says that some sort of blind impulse must have seized Jean on the tree those many months ago, that he hadn't known what he was doing. He asks Jean to confirm that it was some impulse, not some deep feeling against Fanny, that took hold of him that day. Jean answers that some ignorance or crazy thing inside him made him jostle the limb. Fanny assures him that he understands and believes Jean. The doctor tells Jean that he's going to set the bone this afternoon. Jean can come back that evening after Fanny comes out of the anesthesia. Jean goes about his day mechanically and comes back to the infirmary at the appointed time. Dr. Stankpole finds him in the hall outside Fanny's room and tells him that Fanny is dead. As Jean listens numbly, the doctor explains that a bit of marrow escaped from the bone as he was setting it, entering Fanny's bloodstream and stopping his heart. Jean doesn't cry, not even later at Fanny's funeral. He feels that, in some way, it is his own funeral as well. Jean's nighttime wanderings led him to a tragic realization. As he floats aimlessly, he comes to recognize that he has no sense of himself, no sense of his own identity or being. Jean has spent so much of the novel losing himself and Fanny that, once severed from him, he feels himself to be a ghost, departed from the world of the living. This spectral existence renders him deaf to the profound lessons that his world has to teach him. It cuts him off from a meaningful life. Thus, he tells us that the landscape speaks to him but that he cannot hear its messages. It is difficult to know what to make of the interaction between the two friends on the following day. At night, when Jean comes to Fanny's window, Fanny lashes out at him. But the next day, Fanny is ready to forgive, ready to believe that what happened on the branch arose from a sudden, uncontrollable urge that Jean could not control, that it had nothing to do with their friendship. The reader is left uncertain as to whether Fanny really believes this idea or is simply forcing himself to believe. If he were to believe that Jean really harbored some deep resentment toward him, he would have to give up Jean's friendship, a prospect that he considers too painful. Similarly, when Jean eagerly joins Fanny in attributing the jaunts to blind impulse, we are left to question the extent to which he believes this idea. Again, Jean, ever the problematic narrator, withholds information. He tells us what he says to Fanny, but characteristically, he does not tell us his thoughts. Ultimately, by refusing to resolve the matter definitively, The novel forces the reader to contemplate the subtleties of the story. That is, unable to determine the truth behind Fanny's fall, we must base considerations of Jean's seeming guilt on other elements. His mindset prior to the fall, his feelings of rivalry and envy would seem to render Jean guilty regardless of whether or not he consciously jostled the branch. For example, if he wished for harm to come to Fanny, even if not at the specific moment in the tree, then this malevolent intention would cost him our trust and lead us to believe that he might well have been responsible for the accident. Jean's devotion to Fanny after the accident, however, would seem to exonerate him. On the other hand, one can argue that this devotion arises out of Jean's deep shame, which may itself be considered in various lights. His shame seems to point to his guilt, yet perhaps his intense regret and self-hatred have sufficed as atonement for his misdeed.